What's up, fantasy managers? I want to talk about the big guys up front because they should be able to eat their cake too. The offensive line is important for your fantasy player to score points. I have the Week 10 offensive line report that you should know about. I know you're interested, so stick around for 7 seconds. This information can help you decide your own fantasy tiebreakers. Who to start, who to sit. By understanding the advantages in the trenches will give you the advantage over your league mates. I have 3 players you want to target. I have 3 players you want to avoid. All this information is on PFF. I subscribe to it, so you don't have to, but I will relay the information to you, starting with my notes right now. And the first offensive line that I want to look into is the Jets versus the Cardinals. The Jets offensive line has allowed the 4th lowest pressure rate in the league at 19.8% this season. The Cardinals defensive line ranks 30th in pass rush grade at 57.9 and ranks 29th in pressure rate at 29.3%. So what this is saying is that the Jets offensive line is pretty good at preventing pressure from getting to Rodgers, while the Cardinals defensive line has a tough time getting to quarterbacks, and that's why they are ranked and graded so low. So who does this benefit? Well, it can benefit Garrett Wilson. Look what happens when you give Aaron Rodgers some time. Last game, he had a 21-yard touchdown, a 27-yard touchdown. The other person this benefits is Davante Adams. You give Aaron Rodgers some time. He had a 37-yard touchdown just last game. But the number one person that you want to target this week to light up your roster is quarterback Aaron Rodgers. And when you're giving Aaron Rodgers time to throw, when you're giving time to the wide receivers to actually run their routes, he could throw a deep ball, and his deep ball completion percentage is 46.7%, and that is ranked 3rd among quarterbacks in the NFL. And that's what you want as a Garrett Wilson owner, Davante Adams owner, and an Aaron Rodgers owner. Then PFF says Rodgers currently sits as the overall quarterback 14 on the season, as he's managed just 2 top 12 weekly finishes, but stands out as a potential streaming option this week in a favorable matchup. Considering the advantage in the trenches, Rodgers should have a clean pocket to work from. This has been an area of strength for him this season, as he earned an 80.9 passing grade, and that's 14th overall. More importantly, Rodgers has delivered a league-leading 13 big-time throws and the 3rd best 5% big-time throw rate when kept clean, which can allow him to utilize his high-end receiving threats and Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams, like what I just said 5 seconds before. According to PFF's Strength of Schedule tool, the Jets own the 2nd best matchup for quarterbacks this week against Arizona, so you should be able to put Aaron Rodgers into your lineup to light it up. Now, the second offensive line that we want to target in this is the Atlanta Falcons versus the New Orleans Saints. The Falcons offensive line ranks right around average in most pass blocking metrics, including a 66.3 pass blocking grade. So they're about 50-50. They're going to sometimes stop the pressure and sometimes they're going to allow that pressure. But the Saints defensive line ranks 26 in pass rushing grade at 62.4 this season, which means they rarely get to the quarterback. So in the end, even though Atlanta has an average offensive line when it's preventing pressure to get into the quarterback, the Saints cannot get to the quarterback. It is a hard time. It is difficult for them to get to the quarterback. One person that this does benefit, of course, is Kirk Cousins, because when he sits in the pocket and he's not getting any pressure, his clean pocket completion percentage is 70%, and that's 12th overall. So he's a top 12 quarterback completion percentage when he's not getting pressure. So obviously this helps him, but the person that we are aiming for today that we want to put into your lineups and light it up is wide receiver Darnell Mooney. And this is a great matchup for Darnell Mooney because his season stats, he's 9th in targets, 7th in air yards, and 10th in deep targets. So when your quarterback is getting enough time to be able to throw to the ball, not getting pressured, in a clean pocket, he's targeting this guy and he's targeting him downfield. And then in my notes, Mooney has been delivering strong fantasy production in recent weeks, having carved out a significant role in Atlanta's offense, leading the team in receiving yards and having run the most routes, 307, on the team. An advantage in the trenches could lend value to Mooney's fantasy potential this week, as his target rate on non-pressure dropbacks, 23.4%, ranks 2nd on the team behind only Drake London, who may not even play this game. Mooney's 16% target rate on pressure dropbacks ranks 4th among the team's 5 qualifying receiving options in those situations. The Saints are also allowing the 11th most points per game, 28.2, to the wide receiver position, and are the 11th best matchup for wide receivers according to PFF's Strength of Schedule tool. Additionally, the Saints secondary will now be without their top coverage corner, Marshall and Lattimore because he has been traded to Washington. This is a division game. I expect Darnell Mooney to light up your roster this week, especially if Drake London's out. And the third and final team that I want to look into, the offensive line, is the Steelers versus the Commanders. The last 2 weeks, the Steelers offensive line has been on the ice out segment of these episodes, saying to stay away from them. But this week, PFF is saying they're going to win the battle of the trenches. The Steelers offensive line ranks 12th in run blocking grade at 66.0 this season. The Commanders defensive line is allowing 1.9 rushing yards before contact per attempt, which is tied for the worst mark in the league, while they rank 27th in run defense grade. So what this is saying is the Commanders are giving up a lot of yards before their opposing running backs are even being touched. And their defensive line run grade is absolutely horrible. They cannot stop the run. And one of the players this will benefit is Jaylen Warren. Of course it'll benefit for Jaylen Warren because he's a running back. And did you just read all these grades? But no, Jaylen Warren has been playing like crap this year. He gets more points in the receiving game than he has in the running game. The person to target from this offense that you want to put in your lineup to light it up is Najee Harris. And yes, it is weird to say, but the person to target in this is Najee Harris. If you go look back to the last couple of years, Jaylen Warren was the one that looked like he was actually a better runner. The stats showed that he was a better runner. But this season, it's a whole different story. Najee Harris, 11th in juke rate. Najee Harris, evaded tackles, he's 5th overall. Breakaway runs, he's 7th overall. This year, he is the better runner. So this game, he's the one that you want to target to light up your fantasy roster. When given at least one rushing yard before contact, Harris is averaging 7.3 yards per carry, which is the 11th best mark among 50 qualifying running backs. Harris's 0.29 missed tackles forced per attempt in those situations ranked as tied for the 6th best mark among the same qualifying running backs. Harris continues to lead the team's backfield in touches, and over the last 3 games has accumulated the 8th most fantasy points among running backs over that span, heading into the team's Week 9 bye. Harris also draws a favorable matchup overall as the Commanders offer the 8th best matchup for running backs according to PFF's strength of schedule tool. So Harris is coming on late. The last 3 games he has scored 20, 17, 16 points in PPR, and now he has another good matchup because the Commanders give a lot before they're putting any pressure on the running back. What I say earlier, 1.9 rushing yards before contact for the Commanders. And when Harrison gets at least 1 yard before contact, he's averaging 7.3 yards per carry. That's good. So it sounds like Harrison's going to be another player, a running back this week that will light up your roster. If you made it this far, and if you're enjoying the information I'm giving you about the offensive line report for Week 10, then please hit the subscribe, press a like. It goes a long way. We have a goal to reach 1,500 subscribers before the end of the football season. We can't do it without you. We appreciate all you zoners out there. Everything and anything goes a long way. Thank you for watching. So now let's look at the other side of the spectrum. These are the offensive lines that we want to look into so we can find out which players that we want to avoid, which players we want to ice out of our rosters. And the first game we're going to talk about, the first offensive line we're going to talk about is the New England Patriots versus the Chicago Bears. The Patriots offensive line ranks 30th in pass blocking grade at 49.1, while allowing the highest pressure rate of 39.4% in the league. The Bears defensive line owns a top 10 pass rush grade of 70.8 this season, and their top pass rusher, Montez Sweat, has the potential to return this week after missing the last game. So the Patriots, they straight up have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. They are not good at protecting the quarterback. They allow a lot of pressure, and the Chicago Bears are top 10 to putting pressure on the quarterback. So who does this affect? It affects the wide receivers from the Patriots, but I'm not sure if you're going to be starting any of them, because the Bears secondary is just great. Maybe starting Demario Douglas, but he will be going up against, I want to say, Kyle Jordan in the slot. Oh, Kyle Gordon. And Kyle Gordon only allows 0.21 fantasy points per route run. That is pretty damn good. And he's going up against Demario Douglas. So the person that we're going to aim at, this is the player that won a lot of people's hearts, because in the last 4 games, he's averaging 18 points a game. But this is the player that we want to avoid. This is the player that we want to ice out for Week 10, and his quarterback, Drake Maye. Maye has the potential to put up some points this week just because he is a rushing quarterback. He's actually 4th in rushing yards per game for quarterbacks at 40. He has been that guy that you've been streaming throughout the last 4 games, but I think this is the week that you do not want to stream him. You want to avoid him. When under pressure, Maye ranks 31st among 36 qualifying quarterbacks and PFF passing grade 34.4, while having the 7th highest turnover-worthy play rate of 6.1% among those same qualifiers. The Bears have also allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks of 11.1 and ranked as the 4th hardest matchup this week in PFF's strength of schedule tool. There will be better weeks to stream Maye this season, but week 10, you definitely want to try to avoid him. It stands out as one of the most suboptimal opportunities to do so this week. So, if you're thinking about streaming him once again for 5 straight weeks, I would try to avoid it and look elsewhere. Ice this guy out of your lineups. Now let's look at game number 2. The offensive line that we are looking at again for back-to-back weeks is the Dallas Cowboys offensive line versus Philadelphia Eagles defensive line. The Cowboys offensive line ranks 27th in pass blocking grade at 57.5. Wow, the Cowboys offensive line sucks. The Eagles defensive line owns an 82 pass rush grade. That's the 3rd best mark in the league. So let's just think about this, right? The Atlanta Falcons, they have one of the worst pressure rates in the league. The Cowboys played against the Falcons last week. The Falcons on the year have 9 sacks total, and a third of those sacks came against the Cowboys last week. And now they go up against the Eagles defensive line that has an 82 pass rush grade. Who does this affect? Well, it affects Cooper Rush, right? It would affect Dak Prescott because the guy never has time to throw and he's always getting hit. He's out because of it. He pulled a hammy. He's not playing. So they got some guy in there named Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush can play well, but that offensive line just stinks. There's no running game that can help him out. Cooper Rush is going to be affected a lot, but the person that affects, the person that we are going to avoid this week, who we're going to ice out of our lineups, is wide receiver Ceedee Lamb. And yes, it's true, Ceedee Lamb will be affected with Dak Prescott not playing. I actually have Ceedee Lamb as my pause of the week. I don't think he's going to put at wide receiver 1 numbers anymore. He can still put in probably low-end wide receiver 2, but he is now going to be touchdown dependent. And past games, a couple years ago when Rush was the quarterback, he did have some good games, but he did not have wide receiver 1 games. He never had 100 yards receiving with Cooper Rush. And the Eagles in the last 3 games, they are ranked 18th, only giving up 20 points to wide receivers. And then their defense in general over the last 3 weeks, 8 sacks and 1 forced fumble. So this is going to be a very tough matchup for the Cowboys offensive line, for Ceedee Lamb. Lamb is an undeniable talent, and it'll be rare that most fantasy lineups have enough options better than Ceedee Lamb where he can be avoided. But for those in that position, this could be the week to do so. The main concern, of course, come from Dak Prescott landing on injured reserve, leaving Lamb with Cooper Rush as his quarterback this week. The other concerns come from this week's opponent and the disadvantages in the trenches for the Cowboys. On pressure dropbacks, Lamb is seeing just an 11.5% target rate, which ranks 4th on his own team and is a significant drop-off from his 33.8% team-leading target rate on non-pressure dropbacks. Lamb has 3 games where he's finished outside the top 24 PPR wide receivers this season, and the concern is that he will likely be in that range again this week, which isn't so bad that he'll be on all the benches, but it's quite a step down from his usual locked-in wide receiver 1 status. So, like I said, PFF is agreeing with me. I have this guy on pause for this week. He could put up numbers, but his wide receiver 1 status will be gone until Dak Prescott comes back. If you have better options, which I doubt it because this guy was the 1st, 2nd, 3rd overall draft pick, try to ice this guy out of your lineups. Okay, up next is the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Jaguars offensive line ranks 23rd in run blocking grade 60.7 and 20th in rushing yards created before contact per attempt at 1.2. The Vikings have allowed just 1.2 rushing yards before contact per attempt. That's 12th best, while ranking 3rd in run defense grade. So what this means for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Duval County, is that they're not giving up. They're not earning a lot of ground when it comes to the run game. They're only earning 1.2 yards before contact. While the Vikings defensive line is actually, they're not moving. They're a wall. They're only allowing 1.2 yards rushing before contact. So in those trenches, when it comes to the run game, the Vikings are doing a lot better than the Jags offensive line. So who does this affect? Well, it affects one of the running backs. Let's say Tank Bigsby. And Tank Bigsby, he's been on my bench, and he's been great. His yards per touch is 7th overall. His juke rate is 3rd overall. Evaded tackles 11th overall. His explosive rating 3rd overall. Breakaway runs 10th overall. True yards per carry, 9th overall. This guy's been great all year when he's actually had the starting role. He doesn't have the starting role this week. It's Travis Etienne, and the person that you want to evade, the player that you want to avoid, the player that you want to ice out is Travis Etienne Jr. If you don't believe me, ask Tyler. Tyler's been icing this guy out of his lineup for the past month and a half. And Travis Etienne is a 2023 Najee Harris to Jaylen Warren. He has not shown that he's been the better runner this year, but he is getting a majority of the carries. Travis returned to the lineup last week for Jacksonville, but wasn't a full-time contributor, sharing snaps with Tank Bigsby. Both players entered that game banged up. On top of concerns about potentially shared workload, Etienne has struggled to live up to his ADP from this offseason, having yet to crack the top 20 PPR finishers at his position on any given week, and this guy was picked up in the 2nd round, people. For this matchup specifically, given his disadvantages in the trenches, Etienne is averaging just 2.7 yards per carry when contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage, which ranks 33rd among qualifying running backs in those situations. Etienne's rushing grade of 57.4 also ranks just 37th among the same backs and circumstances. Considering the matchup and the unknown of whether he'll be a full-time contributor again this week, Etienne can be avoided and iced out of your lineups. I'm not saying I'm going to start Tank Bigsby just because he will still have potential to take away carries. And Tank Bigsby is a guy that, Tank's in his name. He wants to carry the load. He needs to carry the load. But I'm not starting him. I'm not starting Etienne either. If I had him, like Tyler's been doing for the past month and a half, ice this guy out of your lineup. Now I'm going to do my quick hits where I talk about a few games that you want to be a part of or you want to stay away. The first game I want to talk about is what I have here is the Kansas City Broncos game. The Kansas City offensive line allows a 25% pressure rate. That's low. That's below average actually, and they're giving up, and that's being converted to 10% into sacks. That's very low. The Broncos defensive line is 35. They get pressure on quarterbacks 35% of the time, which is actually pretty high, but it's converted into sacks 17% of the time, and that is average. So it looks like the Kansas City has the advantage here by 21% in the passing game, and I do believe it's because their offensive line is really good at limiting pressure and really good at limiting sacks. Okay, and this next matchup is pretty crazy too. It's the Chicago offensive line versus the New England defensive line. The Chicago offensive line allows 29% of pressure rate, and that's converted into sacks 20% of the time. That's pretty dang high. But if you look at New England's defensive line, they're only getting to the quarterback 24% of the time, and they're converting into sacks 17% of the time, both below average. So they're saying because of how bad the New England Patriots defensive line is, the Chicago Bears offensive line wins this matchup, and they're actually given a 26% advantage in the passing game. So Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, they should all benefit from this, but it also all lies on Caleb Williams because he's a roller coaster. You got to roll the dice on him. He's kind of up and down all season. He was down last week. Maybe he'll be up this week. I don't know, but he's a guy that you want to roll the dice on. Now, when we're talking about the running, I found this game, the Atlanta's offensive line versus the Saints defensive line. We talked about this for the passing and now the running. Atlanta's given up, or they're earning a 1.27 yards before contact. That's kind of around average, maybe a little bit below. But the Saints over here, look at this. This is crazy. They are giving up 1.60 yards before contact. That is very bad. And they're giving up 12 yards, or they're giving up 12 attempts inside the 5-yard line, which is turned into a touchdown 67% of the time. And Atlanta only has 7 runs inside the 7-yard, or inside the 5-yard line. But that has been converted into touchdowns 57% of the time. I'm looking at this. I'm seeing Bijan Robinson could have another blow-up game here. They are giving Atlanta 41% advantage in the run game. Bijan Robinson is going to have 1.6 yards of clear space before he's even touched. And he's actually 7th on yards created per touch at 4.40. So you're giving this guy 1.60 yards before contact. And then he's creating another 4 yards after that. This guy can have a monster game this week for Bijan Robinson. I would try to play him if you have him. If you can. Do it. All right, the second game that you might want to have a part of when it comes to the running game is the Miami Dolphins offensive line against the Rams defensive line. PFF is showing right here that the Dolphins have a 37% advantage in the running game against the Rams. And everything seems about normal here, where the Rams earn a 1.29 yards before contact. That's about average. The Rams are allowing 1.32 yards before contact. That's about average. So I think where you're looking at here when it comes to the goal line. So the goal line, the Rams are giving up 10 rushes inside the 5, and it's turned into a touchdown 50% of the time. From when I'm looking at this, because right here it shows that the Dolphins have they've had runs inside the 5-yard line 9 times, and it's kind of under 50%. So because the Rams are actually giving up more touchdowns at a higher rate on defense inside the 5, I think that's why they give them the advantage. So what I'm looking at here, I mean, you just give Devon Achane that much space, he's going to break through. He's going to do something. But Raheem Mostert, if this guy gets to the goal line, he has a 50% chance of scoring a touchdown. I like those odds. So Raheem Mostert could have a good game in Week 10 against the Rams. And for a game that you want to try to avoid when it comes to the passing scene, it is the Washington offensive line against the Pittsburgh defensive line. And I'm looking at this right here. So they only allow 25% of pressure rate. I mean, that's pretty good. Turns into a sack 8% of the time. That's pretty good. But the Steelers, they get to the quarterback 31% of the time, or they get a pressure rate of 31%, and that's turned into a sack 19% of the time. That is great. Those are about average to above average when it comes to the pressure rate and sack. PFF is giving the Commanders here a negative 48% disadvantage when it comes to the passing game. I'm actually looking at this because I have Jaden Daniels, and it is scary to actually want to start this guy. I am going to start this guy, but it's mainly because if he's rushed out of the pocket, that's where he could get dangerous. I mean, he's rushing a lot, so he's able to use his legs on scramble plays. He can make something out of that, but when it comes to the passing, it looks like it might be a struggle for him. So we might be relying on Jaden Daniels' legs for Week 10. And now I'm going to move up just a little bit. I'm going to go to the Tampa Bay offensive line against the San Francisco defensive line. Tampa Bay's passing game is at minus 11, so they're at a disadvantage in this game against the San Francisco 49ers. So Tampa Bay is only allowed a 26% pressure rate, which is a little bit below average, I would say, or at the average mark, but only converted into sacks 10% of the time. That is definitely below average. But the San Francisco 49ers, they have a 32% pressure rate against quarterbacks, which is turned into sacks 16% of the time. So I think they're saying this number here, the 16%, weighs out the number of the 10%. And Baker Mayfield's the quarterback. He's another guy. I believe he's quarterback 2 on the year. You got to play your studs. He might not have a great game. He still has Cade Otton, so he can do some damage. He probably will get some touchdowns either through Cade Otton, Rashid White, or Bucky Irving. There might be a lot of drop-down passes, so those players that I just mentioned could still have a good game. I believe Baker Mayfield will have a good game, but not a great game. So now on the rushing side of things, I want to look at the game. The Bills' offensive line against the Colts' defensive line. So the Bills' offensive line has earned a 1.50 yards before contact, but the Colts' defensive line has actually been stepping up lately and only allowing 1.21 yards before contact, and that's a little bit below average. And then when you go into inside the 5, they've had 12 runs inside the 5, but the Colts defense have only given up a touchdown 8% of the time. And I think that's where the disadvantage here. They're saying the Bills have a disadvantage of 10% when it comes to the run game against the Colts. So who's that going to affect? That's going to affect James Cook, maybe even Ray Davis. So there's a good possibility that they're not going to get touchdowns, and Josh Allen may get some rushing touchdowns this game. He might have to take over. And then the last game, let's look into real quick, is the Tennessee Titans offensive line against the Chargers defensive line. The Tennessee Titans are earning only a 0.99 yards before contact. I believe that is the worst in the league. They have only 4 rushes inside the 5-yard line, and they've converted on that 25% of the time. So they only have 1 rushing touchdown inside the 5-yard line. And then when you look at the Chargers here, they're giving up only 1.29 yards before carry. That's around the average, maybe a little bit below. But they've only allowed 4 yards or 4 attempts inside the 5-yard line as well, and have only given up 2 rushing touchdowns. So this is saying here, PFF is saying that the Titans are negative 26, and they're at a disadvantage when it comes to the running game. So who does this affect? Tony Pollard, obviously. Tony Pollard has actually been killing it lately, and he's got good matchups in the playoffs. But right now, if you could look elsewhere and try to avoid him, I would not play him this week. I would try to ice him out. And that's a wrap for the offensive line report for week 10. Now you know about which players to target. Now you know which players to avoid. Plus, you have more information on additional games that you want to be a part of or try to stay away from. Like we were targeting Josh Downs to light up our roster, but he only managed 12 points in PPR. Barely making a flex. He did lead the team in receptions, targets, and maybe even yards, which is great. But, I mean, when you're still not producing that much. So they were counting on the Minnesota Vikings not to have a good blitz game, but that game they were, like, on point, and it really affected Flacco. I think so that one was a miss, but I would say that it is good that you're seeing Josh Downs to lead the team in receptions, targets, and yards. So that's pretty good for that part. But this is a miss. I said to ice out Jalen Waddle, who had 2 receptions on 2 targets for -4 yards and a touchdown. You got your 8 points of PPR. I say that one was right. Justin Herbert, but he ended up having the second best fantasy scoring of his season with 22 points. That one was a miss. I said to ice out Rico Dowdle, but there was a potential that he could do well. PFF didn't say this, but I added this, that there was a potential that he could do well in the receiving game, and he had 5 receptions on 6 targets, 32 yards, and a touchdown. So I like to say that half and half. PFF said to ice him out. I said that he could do well in the passing game, and he did do well, but this isn't me writing the article. It is PFF. I said to not start him, to ice him out, and he did well, so that one was a miss. So it was 3 out of 6, 50%. Not good, not bad, but we want to do a little bit better than that. We want you guys to watch this video and be able to rely on the information. That's why I always give my little tidbits and stats too, in case I don't always agree with PFF or it's something to watch out for, for the future. So every Friday night, Tyler and I do a live ranking show and answer questions from the chat. If you want to know where your players landed in the week 10, if they were high, if they were low, make sure to click this video right here. I'll talk to you in that video. Deuces.